We will start with the affirmative opening speech.
Hello, I'm Congressman Folkowski, and I stand in the affirmation of the bill to increase federal funding and cooperation with international organizations. These organizations help millions of people globally through programs that deal with foreign trade, global finance, improving people's health, and decreasing poverty and hunger. One of the reasons we should pass this bill is to help these international organizations that help with global peace and welfare but don't have enough money to fully help. Better World Campaign stated, the UN's regular and peacekeeping budgets are approved by the UN General Assembly. For 2022, the regular budget totals $3.12 billion, approximately 20% of which is for special political missions alone. This covers nearly 40,000 employees and duty stations around the world at $1.6 billion less than the 2022 operating budget of the state of Delaware. Even though the UN is considered a failure to many people, according to the UN official website, the United Nations provides food and assistance to 91.4 million people in 83 countries around the world. The United Nations supplies vaccines to almost half, 45%, of the world's children, helping to save 3 million lives every year. This bill also talks about the funding of other organizations, one of which would be the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. They also help immensely when it comes to peace. NATO stated that the organization strives to secure a lasting peace in Europe, based upon common values of individual liberty, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. This organization has also been the key from stopping Russia from invading other European countries. And with NATO weapons and support, Russia is becoming halted in the Ukrainian attack. For these reasons, Presiding Officer, I urge you to pass this bill.
We will proceed to the negation opening speech.
Hello, I'm Congressman Cordova, and I stand in the negation of the bill to increase federal funding and cooperation with international organizations. These organizations should not get increased funding. The UN is a failing institute and ignores the human rights violations that it claims to protect. According to Heritage.org, the UN had an assistance mission for Rwanda in 1994, which failed to stop the majority Hutus from killing almost 1 million members of the Tutsi minority. The massacre of more than 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men at the hand of Serb forces in Srebrenica in 1995 was another UN failure. These show the ignorance towards human rights violations that the UN possesses. But even in the modern day, things have not improved. On October 6th of this year, the UN Rights Council voted down a Western-led motion to hold a debate about alleged human rights abuses by China and Uyghurs and other Muslims in Xinjiang. These failures are not just contained to the UN, though. NATO is also failing one of its key missions, striving to secure lasting peace in Europe, based on common values of individual liberty, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Even though NATO has given Ukraine supplies that have aided them in the Russian conflict, they have not intervened even if Russia is going against NATO and violating their human rights. According to the State Department of the U.S., in the Russia-instigated and fueled conflict in the Donbass region, Russian-led forces reportedly engaged in unlawful or arbitrary killings of civilians, including extrajudicial killings, forced disappearances, and abductions, torture, and cases of cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. These go directly in the violation of NATO and the UN. And both organizations continue to turn a blind eye. For these reasons, Presiding Officer, I urge you to reject this bill.
We will now move on to our affirmation cross-examination.
Why should we increase funding towards these organizations when they constantly turn a blind eye? These organizations have less funding than the state of Delaware, yet have the burden of protecting global security and trade. It is essential we increase the funds so that we can address these issues.
If the UN is turning a blind eye, what is to say that giving them more money will address these issues? Concerning both Russia and China are permanent members of the Security Council and key funders as well.
On October 7th, the UN Human Rights Council passed a historic resolution to appoint a special reporter on the situation of human rights in the Russian Federation, showing that they are willing to investigate one of their permanent members.
Should we value human rights?
Yes, human rights are essential.
Then why are we funding the ignorance of these? The UN has completely ignored China's human rights violations and has only investigated Russia's human rights, but has not acted on it.
We need this funding so we can do research and help others and stop these human rights violations.
Why should we increase the funding on this one? Wouldn't it be better to increase the budget slightly considering how much of a cost increase it would be?
Increasing trade, meaning it will be worth the money we put in.
We will now move on to our negation cross-examination.
Why would this bill harm the country and the people?
This bill would affect the economy and would not be beneficial due to how corrupt these organizations are. The Department of Justice had the former UN General Assembly President and 5 others charged for a 1.3 million robberies.
Do you agree that the UN helps millions of people globally live?
Even though I agree that it does help millions of people, the UN also contributes to the deaths caused by human rights violations.
Shouldn't we try to address the financial inequality that the UN, World Bank, and World Trade Organization are trying to fix?
Even though I agree that we should, the financial impact on the U.S. would not benefit the nation as a whole. This bill would just take money away from projects that are trying to solve poverty and hunger in the U.S., meaning the UN would just become a second barrier that's stopping us from decreasing these numbers.
We will now start the Grand Crossfire.
Why aren't international organizations a good idea?
International organizations create a barrier between countries that allow them to abuse their rights and do human rights violations. What will an increased funding do for these organizations?
It will allow us to address these issues and help alleviate poverty. Do you think that climate change is being addressed the way it should be?
No, I do not, but I still believe that this amount of funding would be way too much and would go to a corrupt system and corrupt people. Why shouldn't the U.S. invest in the common interests of the nation?
Because millions of people are dying of hunger, an issue that the UN can help with immensely.
The affirmation will now finalize their arguments by presenting their closing speech.
Presiding officer, you should pass this bill on the basis of improving human rights violations, alleviating poverty, decreasing hunger, and increasing global trade. My opponent speaks on human rights, and as I pointed out, we need this money so that we can improve the UN. This bill also helps with the military capabilities for NATO and will help in the attack on Ukraine, and may also help stop China's invasion of Taiwan. My opponent also spoke on how we should help ourselves before others, but as I stated, expanding international agreements and trade will come with a huge economic impact and will help millions here and around the globe. Presiding officer, if you agree with the arguments I have made over my opponent, I urge you to pass this bill. Thank you.
The negation will now finalize their arguments by presenting their closing speech.
Presiding officer, you should reject this bill on the basis of giving money to a corrupt system, ignorance in the face of human rights violations, and national interest over global interest. This bill is too much of an increase of funding and will take billions of dollars away from other projects trying to help with poverty, hunger, and many issues with society. This money will have little to none economic benefits and will just give millions to the corrupt people, and the money will still be split up very thin. My opponent speaks on helping others, which this may do, but it will only help those at the top of the UN and will be a small amount actually given to help kids and people globally. Presiding officer, if you agree with these arguments I have made over my opponent, I urge you to reject this bill. Thank you.